By late November 1942, the frozen expanses of the Don Bend and the Volga steppe had become the crucible of the Second World War, as the Soviet Red Army successfully closed the jaws of Operation Uranus, trapping the entire German Sixth Army inside a 30-mile-wide cauldron known as the Kessel. Generaloberst Friedrich Paulus and his 250,000 soldiers were suddenly isolated on a barren, snow-swept landscape, cut off from all overland supply lines and facing the terrifying prospect of slow starvation and ammunition exhaustion. In our historical timeline, the high commands of both the Army and the Luftwaffe collapsed into a state of operational paralysis, as Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring made his rash, mathematically illiterate promise to airlift 300 tons of supplies daily into the pocket using an overstretched transport fleet that possessed neither the aircraft nor the favorable winter weather to succeed. However, in this alternate tactical scenario, we explore a far more aggressive, desperate, and intellectually coherent gamble conceived by Generaloberst Kurt Student, the founder and driving spirit of Germany's parachute forces. Student, watching the unfolding catastrophe from his headquarters in Germany, recognized that a passive aerial bridge of slow-moving Junkers Ju-52s landing on ice-slicked runways was a slow-motion sentence of death for the Sixth Army, and instead proposed a radical vertical intervention code-named Operation Cauldron. Under this daring plan, rather than committing the elite paratroopers of the 1st Parachute Division to fight as standard ground-bound infantry in the defensive battles of Leningrad and the Caucasus, the Luftwaffe would execute the largest and most desperate combat drop in military history, sending thousands of elite Fallschirmjäger directly into the heart of the Stalingrad pocket. The strategic objective of Operation Cauldron was not to reinforce the street fighting inside the city, but to drop a highly concentrated, heavily armed airmobile shield along the western perimeter of the pocket, transforming the vulnerable, snow-packed airstrips of Gumrak and Pitomnik into an impregnable, heavily fortified airhead. By dropping paratroopers and heavy glider-borne equipment directly into the path of the advancing Soviet divisions, Student aimed to buy precious time for Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's newly formed Army Group Don to launch its relief offensive, Operation Winter Storm, establishing a secure permanent air bridge that could facilitate a massive coordinated breakout to save Germany's finest army from total destruction. The execution of Operation Cauldron commenced in the pre-dawn darkness of December 8, 1942, as hundreds of transport aircraft and heavily laden gliders took off from staging fields in the eastern Ukraine and the Crimea, including Tatsinskaya, Morozovskaya, and Salsk. The logistics of the operation required an unprecedented concentration of the Luftwaffe's remaining air transport reserves, pulling every available Junkers Ju-52, Heinkel He-111, and the newly introduced Arado R-232 heavy transports from across occupied Europe. As the massive armada approached the outer ring of the Soviet encirclement, they flew into a wall of intense anti-aircraft fire and intercepting Yak-1 fighters. But the sheer scale of the airborne assault overwhelmed the Soviet air defense network. Rather than performing a standard high-altitude parachute drop, which would have scattered the paratroopers across miles of frozen steppe, the Luftwaffe pioneered a low-altitude tactical assault utilizing hundreds of DFS-230 and giant Gotha Go 242 transport gliders, which were towed in long, silent strings before releasing their tow ropes to glide noiselessly through the freezing winter fog. These gliders, packed with the elite soldiers of the 1st Parachute Regiment and the specialized parachute anti-aircraft machine gun battalion, made precision landings on the open, snow-packed fields immediately surrounding the vital airfields of Pitomnik and Gumrak. The paratroopers, wearing their distinctive rimless helmets and insulated winter camouflage smocks, spilled out of the wooden and fabric hulls of the gliders within seconds of hitting the ground, instantly establishing a perimeter and securing the landing zones. This dramatic vertical insertion caught the outer Soviet divisions completely by surprise, as they had expected the Luftwaffe to continue its predictable pattern of slow, high-altitude supply drops, and instead found themselves suddenly engaged by aggressive, highly coordinated shock troops who were heavily armed with rapid-firing MG-42 machine guns and portable recoilless anti-tank rifles, creating immediate tactical chaos along the Soviet inner ring of encirclement. With the landing zones secured, the primary objective of the Fallschirmjäger shifted to transforming the strategic airfields of Pitomnik and Gumrak from simple, ice-slicked runways into an impregnable, heavily fortified defensive redoubt. In our historical timeline, these airfields were highly vulnerable, poorly defended clearings that were easily targeted by Soviet artillery and overrun during the final phases of the battle, but under the tactical framework of Operation Cauldron, they became the heavily fortified core of the entire pocket. Utilizing the heavy equipment brought in by the giant Gotha Go 242 gliders, including light-tracked vehicles, 2 cm flak anti-aircraft guns, and specialized 7.5 cm Leichtgeschütz 40 recoilless guns, the paratroopers dug deep, log-reinforced defensive bunkers into the frozen permafrost, constructing a highly integrated network of interlocking machine gun nests and anti-tank strongpoints. This defensive system was specifically designed to withstand the brutal winter conditions and the overwhelming weight of Soviet armored assaults, establishing a secure inner perimeter that shielded the runways from direct Soviet observation and mortar fire. By deploying their rapid-firing anti-aircraft guns in a ground defense role, the paratroopers created a devastating high-velocity wall of fire that could shred Soviet infantry charges and light tanks, while their mobile recoilless guns provided a lightweight but powerful anti-armor capability that could disable Soviet T-34 medium tanks at close range. This localized defensive supremacy allowed the Luftwaffe's transport fleet to land and take off with a level of security and efficiency that had been completely absent in our timeline, dramatically increasing the daily tonnage of fuel, ammunition, and medical supplies delivered to the 6th Army, while simultaneously facilitating the orderly evacuation of tens of thousands of wounded German soldiers who would have otherwise been left to die in the freezing ruins. The strategic climax of Operation Cauldron unfolded in mid-December 1942 as Field Marshal Erich von Manstein launched his long-awaited relief offensive, Operation Winter Storm, spearheading a powerful panzer drive from Kotelnikovo toward the southern sector of the Stalingrad pocket. In our historical timeline, Manstein's relief forces, led by the 57th Panzer Corps, were halted just 35 miles from the pocket along the frozen banks of the Mishkova River because the starved, immobilized 6th Army was forbidden by Hitler from launching a breakout attempt to meet them, a catastrophic refusal that sealed the Army's fate. However, in this alternate scenario, the successful execution of Operation Cauldron had fundamentally altered the tactical calculus by stabilizing the 6th Army's logistics and establishing a secure, heavily fortified airhead on the western flank. As Manstein's panzers engaged the Soviet forces along the Mishkova, Paulus, bolstered by the fresh elite paratrooper forces and the vital fuel reserves flown in through the secure Pitomnik airhead, defied Hitler's rigid stand-fast order and launched a massive coordinated breakout offensive codenamed Operation Thunderclap. The spearhead of this breakout was not composed of starved, demoralized infantry, but of the revitalized panzer divisions of the 6th Army, which attacked due south to meet Manstein's advancing forces. The Fallschirmjäger, operating from their fortified positions around Gumrak, launched an aggressive mobile rearguard action, fighting a desperate delaying battle against the overwhelming weight of the Soviet Red Army to protect the 6th Army's vulnerable flanks as they withdrew from the ruins of Stalingrad, turning the frozen steppe into a high-stakes mobile battlefield where the elite training and specialized tactics of the paratroopers became the thin line between escape and total annihilation. While the alternate history scenario of Operation Cauldron presents a thrilling, tactically dynamic vision of a massive airborne rescue, a rigorous historical and logistical analysis reveals the profound, inescapable limits of Wehrmacht power that ultimately made any such operation a doomed temporary reprieve. Even if we assume the absolute success of the paratrooper drops and the secure fortification of the Gumrak and Pitomnik airfields, the fundamental bottleneck of the entire German war effort, the severe shortage of aviation fuel and transport aircraft, remained an insurmountable barrier. The Luftwaffe simply did not possess the industrial capacity or the pilot reserves to sustain a daily airlift of the magnitude required to feed, fuel and rearm 250,000 men in the depths of a Russian winter, as the massive attrition suffered by the transport squadrons during the initial drops would have rapidly degraded their operational capabilities. Furthermore, the Soviet Red Army possessed an immense, near-limitless reservoir of manpower and artillery that would have eventually crushed the paratrooper defense through sheer weight of numbers and firepower, rendering the secure airfields useless as the Soviet encirclement ring tightened. In the final analysis, the Stalingrad campaign was not lost due to a lack of tactical imagination or elite infantry forces, but because of a systemic, structural bankruptcy within the German war machine, which was economically and logistically incapable of winning a protracted war of attrition against a fully mobilized peer adversary. Therefore, Operation Cauldron, while illustrating the exceptional tactical bravery and specialized capabilities of the Fallschirmjäger, remains a testament to the inescapable reality of military logistics, proving that behind the dramatic myths of airborne glory lies the cold, hard and unforgiving mathematics of industrial warfare, where a nation's ultimate victory is decided not on the battlefield, but on the factory floors and supply lines that feed the engines of war.